Hi, Lily. I really enjoyed reading your book. And so my first question for you is, what was your inspiration for writing this book?
Yeah. So this book was it's a funny story because this book has sort of been at the back, one of those stories that's been at the back of your head for a really long time. Uh it's set at a bakery in Portland, which is actually a real bakery, Standard Baking Company. I used to go there a lot when I was younger, and I would go there and I would get a pastry or something, and then I would be watching the sparrows out on like the little picnic tables. And when I was much, much younger, I remember thinking I should write a cute little story about a sparrow living at the bakery and like how I would love to be a sparrow living at that bakery. And so I ended up writing it years and years later in 2021. And yeah, it started out as just like what I thought would be a short story about a nice place that I knew in my city, but then it kind of snowballed, obviously.
So my second question is, what was your favorite thing about writing it?
There was so honestly, writing this book was like one of the most fun things I've ever done ever. One of my favorite parts was I'm not sure if I can choose one. I mean, other than, winning the contest was one of the biggest honors ever. But some of my favorite parts were probably I submitted this book to some authors that I knew, some of my favorite authors, to see if they would write reviews for it and write a blurb for it. And I honestly didn't think anyone would. But I think the most exciting part of this whole process was when Lily King and Kelly Barnhill, two of my absolute writing idols, both decided to write a blurb for my book. That was really just like amazing.
And then what was your like writing process for this novel? Like how did you sort of like set it up?
Honestly, how writing works for me is it just sort of comes out of me. I can't choose like when or how fast, it just sort of happens. In this case, for this book, and it happens differently for whatever project I'm working on, but for this one, I think it was like the summer before eighth grade for me. I just started writing. Like I would be writing every day, working on this book all summer. And then I think in 2022, I started, revising it. I realized I had a book, and I realized I might want to publish it somewhere. So I started going through it, making it look nice, talking to my some mentors and, parents and having people read it. So yeah, that revision process lasted up until 2022 when I submitted it for the contest. Honestly, it was one summer that it mostly sort of came out of me.
Yeah, cool. It's kind of the same for me. Like I suddenly just get like sudden like bursts of like inspiration. So how long have you been writing for?
I've been writing since about as long as I can remember being able to write. And I know this because I have a notebook from like first grade or something, and it has poems written in it in crayon, and it's like this little tiny thing, and I have it somewhere in my room. So I've been writing just like silly little things for a very, very long time. And yeah, I think I started to consider myself a writer when I, started sending things off into the world. Maybe fifth grade, I was like, oh, I can write. I
Yeah, like I always like look through like my closet and I find like old little like notebooks that I've like written in when I was like really little.
have so many notebooks.
So, what made you decide to like write the story from the perspective of a bird?
That was always a key idea for the novel. It all sort of started out. It was going to be a story about a bird. There was never going to be a human in there, honestly. That sort of came in later in my process. But I think the real reason that it is told from a perspective of a animal rather than a person, as most books are, uh, is that I wanted the book to be really about a human's journey. Even though it is from the eyes of an animal, it is about the woman who captures the sparrow and brings him into her home. And I think, what could be more humanizing than seeing humans from the eyes of someone who isn't a human, like someone who's a pet or has never been inside a house before or seen cereal before. It's like we're getting information about the human world as the sparrow gets it. So I think that is why I stuck with the idea of keeping it as an animal narrator because it gave me a new way to write about things that I already seen, but things the sparrow hadn't.
Yeah, I definitely thought that that was one of the most like really interesting, really fun parts about reading the book, that it was from the perspective of a bird. I noticed that like connection is really like an important theme of this book. So like why do you think that it is important to have like connection with others, and like how does your novel like show this?
Yeah, so one of my main character's struggles is she's sort of isolating herself, and I think the reason I'm writing about this is I feel like in my experience, when people go through difficult times in their life, they tend to just like, put up barriers and just sort of shut the world out in the hopes that that'll make it easier. And I think one of the takeaways I want to have when you're reading this book is to, remember that, there are relationships that you can have and, there are ways you can be loved even if you're having a difficult time. And, I've always also thought that pets, perhaps not a wild sparrow, but I have a dog and chickens and ducks who always I feel like they cheer me up. They, look at me in funny ways and I feel better.
My next question is some other themes that I thought were important in the book, the theme of sort of like freedom and the theme of home. And what made you make those themes like such key parts of the pipe tree?
Well, I knew I wanted the sparrow Eclair to be captured, but I knew I didn't want it to be just a story about why that's bad, just like a sort of cautionary tale for sparrows or whatever. Um, I knew I wanted the human capture to be complicated in different ways. So I guess eventually, as I was writing it, that was sort of reflected in a parallel between Eclair and the woman, rather than it's, bad guy, good guy. They both have sort of elements of being captured in their life.
Yeah,
So
I
I
thought that that added like some really good like layers to the story.
yeah.
Um, I noticed that some parts of the pipe tree are written in sort of like a poetic kind of way, like some lines. So like what made you decide to write it in this way?
Well, I don't know. I'm a poet as well as a story writer. If some people ask me, which one do you like better, writing poetry or writing fiction? And I honestly could not choose. Um, and I think so, yeah, one of the reasons the pipe tree is so, you know, poetic, I guess, some of the parts are poems is because I love poetry and I think it's a great way to write. And then also, I guess, because I'm telling it from the perspective of an animal, I knew I wanted the formatting of the writing to look different than uh, fiction novels normally do. Like even on the page, sometimes things are spaced out in a weird poetic way, and I thought that might help reflect the fact that, the narrator is a sparrow, not in
Yeah.
fact, and who knows how to write paragraphs.
Yeah, that was definitely one of my favorite parts about reading the book. I thought that was like a really interesting way to sort of like go into like Eclair's mind. In your opinion, would things have been different for Eclair if he had never been taken by the handkerchief woman?
Yeah, I think so. I think uh Eclair's uh character transformation is that, he doesn't really see outside of his very small world, figuratively and literally. He's a little bird in a very big city and he sort of keeps things simple for himself. But I think his life would have been different if he hadn't been captured because he wouldn't look at humans the same way. The fact is, he is lots of animals are living in humans' world. Like we are pretty dominant, and I think him being so intimate with human for a long period of time has definitely would change his life. Yeah.
How did making the story from the perspective of a bird change how you wrote it, as opposed to it being told from the perspective of a human?
Well, yeah, well, like I said,
Yeah.
I changed some of the formatting a little bit. Oh, one of the most fun parts of writing this book was sort of the funny aspects of Eclair, who, comes up with weird little phrases, that, sparrow catchphrases. That was incredibly fun to come up with. Little sayings that he has, how he refers to cars as Zoom boxes, etc. That was lots of fun.
Yeah, I definitely really enjoyed that part of the book. I thought that was a really really creative. So another thing that I thought was an important part of the pipe tree was like music. Is music something that is important to you in your life?
That's so cool. That's so interesting that you asked because, yeah, music is a really big, important part of my life. I like to say that I'm a writer and then an actress and then a singer. So those are like my favorite things to do. I love doing musical theater and I love singing in my choir. And, yeah, I do love music just in my life. I love playing piano. I love to sing. And yeah, definitely Eclair and I have that in common. We're definitely both singers.
Who is your favorite character between Eclair and the Handkerchief Woman?
Yeah, there's a very broad cast of characters, is there? Well, I can't really choose. That's not really fair. They're both sort of my babies, aren't they? Um, well, I mean, I kind of I've got to say Claire because he's, sort of become my pet as well. He's just such and he's got a special place in my heart, I think. He reminds me of my ducks.
This is about the ending. I thought that the ending was really like interesting and like really bittersweet. And what made you decide to like end the story this way?
A lot of my stories have bittersweet endings. I guess I'm not sure why. Maybe I just don't like having there be a very clear right or wrong path for the main character or whatever. But I think honestly, the ending was something that was never like fully decided from when I started writing. I would be at the middle of writing the book, which I sort of wrote in chronological order, and I wasn't exactly sure how I wanted it to end. But it became clear to me as I finished writing the book how it should end for both the characters in a way that was both sort of fulfilling for the reader and also real, so that it felt bittersweet in that way.
Yeah, it's kind of the same for me. Like I never like plan the end before I start writing. Like I keep writing and then I until I like really know the characters and really like know like the world of the book. And
Yeah.
until I know that, then I can really fully end it. My last question is, what do you hope that readers will take away from the pipe tree?
Oh, I don't know if there's one specific takeaway. I want people who read The Pipe Tree to come away with it with like a new appreciation for life and the love they have in their relationships. A little bit of the same vibrance and hope for life that Eclair has in the book.
Well, thank you, Lily. That was a really enjoyable conversation, and I really enjoyed your book. And yeah,
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun. Thank you for having
yeah.
me. I'm so glad you liked the book. It's great. It's really incredible to hear.